The smell of sugar and smoke mixed in the air that morning, the way it always did when I pushed myself too hard. My hands were shaking as I pulled the final tray from the oven, steam rising like a warning I ignored. I had been awake for 36 hours straight, preparing desserts for my sister Maya's engagement party, an event she reminded everyone was hers, even though it was being held in the house we both grew up in. I was just the baker. That's what she liked to call me. Not her sister, not family, just the baker. As I shifted the tray, my grip slipped. The metal edge scraped my wrist, and before I could react, the tray tilted. Boiling caramel spilled like molten gold down my arms. Pain exploded instantly, sharp, blinding, unforgiving. I screamed, dropping everything as the tray crashed to the floor. My skin blistered before my eyes. I stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. Tears flooded my vision as I clutched my arms, the burns screaming louder than my voice ever could. The kitchen filled with chaos, shattered glass, smoke alarms, and my own sobs. And then Maya walked in. She took one look at me, flour on my face, burns reddening my skin, tears streaking down my cheeks, and instead of rushing to help, she sighed, loudly, dramatically. "What are you doing now?" she snapped. Maya, it hurts," I gasped, my knees giving out as I sank to the floor. She rolled her eyes. "You ruined the tarts," she said flatly, stepping over broken glass to inspect the mess. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? Guests will be here in 4 hours." That was when she screamed it. "You're just a baker. This is what you're supposed to be good at." The words hit harder than the burns. I looked up at her, my own sister, standing there in her designer dress, arms crossed like I was an inconvenience instead of a human being in pain. Behind her, our mother appeared in the doorway. She hesitated for a moment, just a moment, before siding where she always did. "Maya's right," Mom said quietly. "You should have been more careful." Careful. I laughed then, a broken sound that surprised even me. My arms throbbed, my heart felt like it had been split open, and still I smiled, a small, trembling smile through tears I refused to let fall in front of them again. Because they didn't know. They didn't know that the bakery I ran from a rented corner shop wasn't a cute little hobby. They didn't know the sleepless nights, the loans I paid back alone, the awards I never brought home because no one asked. They didn't know that every dessert I made for this family came from a place of desperate hope, to finally be seen as more than the disposable daughter. As Maya turned away, already barking orders into her phone, Mom told me to clean myself up and not make a scene. So I did. I stood up slowly, my skin screaming, my heart harder than it had ever been. I washed the burns under cold water in silence while they argued about decorations, and as I watched the pain blur into something colder, something sharper, I made a decision. They thought I was just a baker. I would let them believe that, because if they knew what I was about to become, they would have never treated me this way. And none of them realized that the party they were so excited about would be the night the truth finally burned its way to the surface. The burns throbbed all afternoon, a dull pulse that matched the ticking clock in the hallway. I wrapped my arms in gauze I found under the sink, the kind meant for minor cuts. Not the kind of pain that rewires your body's memory. Every movement reminded me of what Maya had said. "You're just a baker." I repeated it silently while setting up dessert tables, arranging trays I hadn't even made. My sister had hired an expensive catering team at the last minute, loudly announcing to anyone who would listen that she couldn't risk another accident. Each word landed like salt on open skin. No one asked how I was doing. Guests began to arrive, filling the house with laughter and perfume and the clink of glasses. Maya floated through the room like a queen, accepting compliments, soaking up attention. When people asked who made the desserts, she smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, a bakery downtown handled it." No name, no mention of me. I stood behind the kitchen counter, unseen, refilling trays and wiping spills. A few guests glanced at my bandaged arms, but looked away quickly, as if my pain made them uncomfortable. That was the role I had always played in this family: useful, silent, replaceable. As I adjusted a display, my cousin leaned over and whispered, "You know, Maya says baking is all you've ever been good at." I smiled, not because it didn't hurt, but because I had learned that showing pain only gave them power. What no one noticed was the man near the back of the room, watching the desserts with quiet interest. He wasn't dressed loudly, didn't laugh too hard or dominate conversations. He studied textures, flavors, the spacing between plates. When our eyes met briefly, he nodded, as if recognizing something unspoken. Later, when I stepped outside for air, he followed. "You made these," he said, not asking. I hesitated. "I helped." He shook his head. "No, you made them. I can tell." I didn't know why, but something in his calm voice made my chest ache. "It doesn't matter," I replied. "They're not mine anymore." He introduced himself as Daniel, just Daniel, and told me he worked with specialty food brands. He asked about my process, my inspiration, my training. No one had ever asked me those things before. Not my parents, not my sister. I answered carefully, like someone relearning how to speak. Before he left, Daniel handed me a card. "If you ever want to talk business, not favors, call me." I tucked it into my pocket, unsure whether hope was allowed anymore. Inside, the party was reaching its peak. Maya tapped a spoon at her glass, calling for attention. She thanked everyone, praised the decor, the caterers, the event planner. Then she gestured vaguely toward the kitchen. "And of course, thanks to my sister," she said with a laugh. "She likes to keep busy." Laughter rippled through the room. I felt something snap, not loudly, but permanently. I looked down at my arms, the burns hidden beneath white gauze, and realized something terrifying and freeing at the same time. They didn't care if I broke, as long as I kept working. That night, long after the guests left and the house fell quiet, I sat alone on the kitchen floor. I unwrapped my bandages, watching the angry red skin beneath. It hurt to look at, but it hurt more to remember how easily they dismissed it. I pulled Daniel's card from my pocket. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt ready. Because if my family only saw me as just a baker, then they were about to learn what happens when they underestimate the one who feeds them. And what Maya didn't know, while she slept peacefully upstairs, was that a single phone call the next morning would begin unraveling everything she believed she deserved. The next morning, I woke before the pain did. For a few seconds, my arms felt numb, almost peaceful. Then reality surged back. Burns tightening, skin pulling, a deep ache that reminded me of everything I was trying not to feel. I sat up slowly, careful not to wake anyone. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after celebration, when messes are left for someone else to clean. That someone was me. I padded into the kitchen and started washing dishes that weren't mine, scraping plates I hadn't eaten from. Halfway through, I stopped. My reflection in the dark window startled me. Eyes tired, shoulders slumped, bandages peeking from my sleeves like a secret I was ashamed of. I wasn't ashamed anymore. I reached into my pocket and felt the edge of Daniel's card. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the unfamiliar feeling of being taken seriously, even once. I stepped outside, letting the cold morning air sting my skin, and dialed the number. He answered on the second ring. "I didn't think you'd call so soon," he said. "I almost didn't," I admitted, "but I'm done being invisible." There was a pause. Then, "Good. Tell me about your bakery." So I did. I told him everything, how I started with a borrowed oven, how I experimented after midnight because electricity was cheaper, how I learned to balance flavors the way some people balance emotions. I told him about the burns too, not for sympathy, but because they were proof of what I was willing to endure. He listened, really listened. By the end of the call, my heart was pounding. I want to see what you do, not in theory, in action. Can you come by my test kitchen tomorrow? Tomorrow. I hung up and laughed quietly, pressing my forehead against the cold brick wall. Tomorrow felt like a lifetime away, and yet closer than anything I had ever wanted. Inside, Maya was already awake. I heard her heels before I saw her, sharp and impatient. She took one look at the half-clean kitchen and frowned. "Why isn't this done yet?" she snapped. I met her eyes. "Because I'm leaving." She blinked. "Leaving where?" "Out," I said simply. "I have an appointment." She laughed, that same laugh she always used when she thought she had the upper hand. With who? Another little farmer's market? Something in my face must have shifted, because her smile faltered. "Don't get ideas," she added quickly. "You know how this works. You help, I shine." I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just picked up my bag and walked past her. For the first time, I didn't wait for permission. The test kitchen was nothing like my cramped shop. Stainless steel everywhere, sunlight pouring in, shelves lined with ingredients I'd only read about. Daniel greeted me with a nod and handed me an apron like it meant something. "Show me," he said. So I did. I baked with burned arms and a steady heart. I worked through pain and memory, letting instinct take over. When Daniel tasted the final product, he closed his eyes. "This," he said quietly, "is not just baking." By the time we left, we had talked about pop-ups, collaborations, something bigger. Not promises, but possibilities. Real ones. When I returned home that evening, the house felt smaller. Maya was on the phone, complaining loudly about how stressed she was, how everyone depended on her. She didn't notice me until I spoke. "I won't be available anymore," I said. She covered the phone and hissed, "You can't just quit on me." I smiled, not the broken smile from the kitchen floor, but a calm one. "Watch me." Her face hardened. "You're nothing without this family." Maybe once, but as I walked away, I realized something powerful. I had survived the heat, and now I was learning how to control it. What Maya didn't know was that the same hands she mocked were about to attract attention she could never buy, and when that happened, she would finally understand what she'd burned away. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of flour, focus, and quiet victories. My burns began to heal, leaving behind angry pink scars that no longer scared me. They felt like proof, evidence of what I had endured and survived. Every morning I went to my bakery, not because I had to, but because for the first time it felt like it belonged to me. Daniel kept his word. He invited me to pop-up events, introduced my desserts to people who spoke in contracts and projections instead of insults. I learned new words: scaling, distribution, brand identity. Words Maya used often, pretending she understood them. I listened carefully, absorbing everything. I didn't announce my progress to my family. I had learned that silence unsettled them more than arguments ever did. Maya, on the other hand, noticed my absence immediately. She started showing up at my bakery unannounced, standing in the doorway like she owned the place. "You've been acting strange," she said one afternoon, eyeing the display case. "Are you hiding something?" I wiped my hands on my apron. "I'm working." She scoffed. "On what? Cupcakes?" I didn't respond. A week later, Daniel called with excitement barely contained in his voice. A high-end hospitality group wanted to feature one of my desserts at their upcoming tasting event. Not a favor, not charity, a paid feature with my name attached. I agreed before fear could talk me out of it.
The tasting was scheduled the same night as Maya's engagement dinner, a more exclusive follow-up she had been bragging about for months. When she found out I wouldn't be attending, her reaction was explosive. "You're choosing some kitchen thing over your own sister?" she yelled, pacing the living room. "Do you know how that makes me look?" I met her gaze calmly. "This is important to me." She laughed sharply. "You think anyone cares who made a dessert?" I thought of Daniel's words. "This is not just baking." "I do," I said. That night, the tasting went better than I could have imagined. People asked for my card. They asked my story. They listened. When someone took photos of me plating, I felt exposed but proud. For once, I wasn't hiding behind anyone else's success. Meanwhile, at Maya's dinner, something went wrong. She showed up at my bakery the next morning, mascara smudged, anger vibrating through her. "You did this on purpose," she accused. "My caterer canceled last minute. I had to scramble." I raised an eyebrow. "That's unfortunate." Her voice dropped to a hiss. "You could have helped." I shook my head. "You never asked, you ordered." She stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. Maybe she was. "What do you want?" she demanded. I thought about that, about years of being overlooked, used, minimized, about burns and bandages and silence. "I want respect," I said, "and I'm done working for free." She left without another word. That afternoon, my mother called, her voice tight. "Your sister is under a lot of stress," she said. "You should apologize." I closed my eyes. "For what?" "For thinking you're better than her." The old me would have cried, would have begged to be understood. Instead, I said, "I don't think I'm better. I think I'm done being smaller." I hung up before she could reply. That evening, an email came through, an offer to discuss long-term collaboration. I reread it 3 times, hands trembling. Maya locked the door on me for years. Now success was knocking, and she was the one trapped outside. What I didn't realize yet was that Maya wasn't done fighting, and the next move she made would drag the whole family into a betrayal I never saw coming.
I should have known Maya wouldn't stop quietly. She never did. Silence, for her, was just a pause before escalation. It started with rumors. A supplier I'd worked with for years suddenly stopped responding to my calls. A venue canceled a pop-up without explanation. When I finally pressed one of them for an answer, they hesitated before saying, "We were told there might be legal issues with your brand." Legal issues. My stomach dropped. 2 days later, an envelope arrived at my bakery. Inside was a cease and desist letter claiming the bakery name, logo, and concept belonged to a company registered under Maya's fiancé's name. My hands shook as I read it again and again, the words blurring. She had stolen it. Not the recipes, but the identity, the thing I had built quietly while she dismissed me. I drove straight to my parents' house. Maya was already there, sitting smugly on the couch, legs crossed like she'd been waiting for applause. "You can't do this," I said, holding up the letter. "That bakery is mine." She smiled. "You should have protected it better." Our parents watched in silence. Not shock, not outrage, just discomfort. "You let her do this?" I asked them. My mother looked away. "Maya's about to start a family. She needs security." "And I don't?" My voice cracked despite myself. Maya stood and leaned close. "You're good with your hands," she whispered. "You'll make something else. But this is real money." Something inside me went cold. I walked out without another word, drove back to my shop, and locked the door behind me. I sat on the floor among empty shelves and cried. Not loud, but deep. The kind of crying that empties you. Then my phone buzzed. Daniel. I almost didn't answer. Pride and pain tangled in my chest, but I did. When I told him everything, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Send me the paperwork." "What?" I asked.
You didn't think you were doing this alone, did you? By morning, I had a meeting with a lawyer, his lawyer, someone who spoke calmly, precisely, and didn't flinch when I explained the family dynamics. She may have filed first, but that doesn't mean she owns your work. Hope flickered again. Meanwhile, Maya went public. She posted about her new business venture, using photos of desserts I had made, claiming she was finally stepping into her passion. Comments flooded in. Praise, excitement, congratulations. I said nothing. Not yet. The lawyer uncovered something crucial. Maya's registration was rushed, sloppy, and based on false claims. Worse, she had used my old contract templates without understanding them. One clause alone could unravel everything. Daniel looked at me across the table. We can fight this, publicly or privately, your choice. I thought about the burns, the party, the way she screamed at me while I was on the floor. I'm done hiding, I said. That night, I received a message from Maya. If you don't back off, I'll make sure everyone knows you're nothing without us. I stared at the screen, strangely calm. She had tried to take what the fire couldn't, but she forgot one thing. I built this from pain, and pain had taught me how to endure. What Maya didn't realize was that her greatest betrayal had just given me the stage, and the truth, once spoken, would leave her with nothing to stand on.
The tasting event was supposed to be quiet. Industry people, press, investors, no drama, no family. Just food and conversation. But Maya had a way of forcing herself into rooms where she didn't belong. When I arrived, my name was on the entrance list. Mine, not hers, not my family's. I stood there for a second, letting that settle into my bones, then walked inside with my head high. The room smelled like citrus, butter, and possibility. Daniel greeted me with a nod. "Everything's ready," he said. "Are you?" I thought of Maya's message. "You're nothing without us." "I am," I said. Halfway through the event, a familiar voice cut through the air. "Oh, this is interesting." I turned. Maya stood near my table, dressed impeccably, her smile sharp. My parents were with her. Of course they were. She picked up a plate, examined it like a critic, then laughed. "So this is your big moment?" she said loudly. "Playing chef?" Conversations around us slowed. People listened. I felt the old heat rise, but it didn't burn this time. It steadied me. "Yes," I said calmly, "it is." Maya turned to the small crowd. She used to make desserts for family parties, for free. She was never serious. Daniel stepped forward, but I lifted a hand. This was mine. "Do you want to tell them," I asked Maya, "how you tried to steal my bakery?" Her smile froze. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said quickly. I reached under the table and pulled out a folder. "Here's the proof, including the clause you copied without reading." Silence. I continued, voice steady. "You screamed at me while I was burned. You called me just a baker. And when I started succeeding, you tried to erase me." My mother gasped softly. My father stared at the floor. Maya laughed nervously. "You're embarrassing yourself." A man from the press spoke up. "Is this true?" Daniel stepped in then. "It is, and the legal process is already underway." Whispers spread like wildfire. Maya's face drained of color. "You can't do this to me," she hissed. "We're family." I met her eyes. Family doesn't burn you, and laugh. I turned back to the room. I won't pretend this didn't hurt, but I'm done letting pain define my place. This is my work, my name, and I'm proud of it. Applause started, soft, then louder. Not thunderous, but real. Maya stormed out. My parents followed, ashamed and silent. Afterward, a journalist asked if I was afraid of backlash. I looked down at my hands, scarred, steady, strong. "No," I said. "I've already survived the worst part." Later that night, alone in my bakery, I iced a cake slowly, carefully, not for an event, not for approval, just for me. The burns had faded to scars. The scars had become armor.
And just when I thought the fire had finally gone out, one last revelation would force my family to face the damage they'd done and decide whether they would ever be allowed back into my life.
The legal battle didn't drag on the way Maya expected it to. Once the evidence surfaced, false filings, misused contracts, public claims she couldn't back up, everything collapsed quickly. The business she tried to steal was stripped from her name before it ever truly existed. Investors pulled out, partnerships vanished, silence replaced the applause she once fed on. For the first time in her life, Maya had nothing to hide behind. My parents didn't call for weeks. When they finally did, it wasn't with apologies, it was with confusion. "We didn't know things were that bad," my mother said, as if not knowing excused years of looking away. I listened quietly, then answered, "You didn't ask." There was nothing else to say. The bakery changed after that, not just in size or reputation, but in feeling. My name hung above the door now, bold, undeniable. Orders came in faster than I could process them. I hired help. I trained them with patience, never raising my voice, never making them feel small. I knew too well what that did to a person. One afternoon, as I was locking up, I noticed someone standing across the street. Maya. She looked different, smaller. No perfect makeup, no confident posture, just a sister I barely recognized. "I heard you're doing well," she said quietly. I nodded. "I am." She hesitated. I was wrong. The words sounded heavy in her mouth, like she'd never practiced them before. I waited, but she didn't say anything else. "I lost everything," she added. I studied her face, searching for the cruelty, the arrogance, but found only exhaustion. For a moment, I remembered us as children, before comparisons, before favoritism turned love into competition. "I didn't take anything from you. You gave it up." She swallowed. "Do you think we could ever fix this?" I thought about the burns, the screams, the way she laughed while I cried on the kitchen floor. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Healing takes longer than fire." She nodded, accepting that more than I expected, and walked away. That night I baked alone, not out of obligation or desperation, but out of love. As the oven hummed softly, I smiled, realizing something profound. They once defined me by my hands, but my hands had built a future they could never control. I was never just a baker. I was a survivor, a creator, a woman who stood in pain, smiled through tears, and walked out stronger than anyone imagined. And every time I look at my scars now, I don't see damage. I see proof that I rose. Because sometimes the people who try to burn you alive are the very ones who teach you how to rise from the ashes.